February 7th, 2022, 6 a.m., Manhattan, New York City. 20 federal agents move simultaneously on 2 addresses. A team of special agents from the FBI's cyber division stacks outside a Dumbo, Brooklyn apartment building. An upscale loft in a converted warehouse overlooking the East River. On another block, a second element is already in position. Radios click twice. Doors come off hinges. Inside the Dumbo apartment, Special Agent Jonathan Levin and his team find a man sitting at a computer desk. He is calm, almost eerily so. His name is Ilya Lichtenstein, 34 years old, Russian-born, American citizen, tech entrepreneur and venture capitalist. Beside a stack of hardware wallets and a MacBook laptop sits something agents did not expect to find in plain view: a burner phone, a list of encrypted seed phrases, and handwritten notes in what looks like a personal cipher. Lichtenstein raises his hands and says nothing. He already knows why they are here. In the other room, his wife Heather Morgan, 31 years old, is pulled from sleep. Morgan is, by her own extensive public declaration, a rapper. She performs under the stage name Razzlekhan. Her music videos feature her draped in fur, rapping about financial crime with a self-conscious glee that would only later take on a different kind of meaning. She is also, on paper, a Forbes contributing technology entrepreneur and CEO of a sales automation startup called Salesfolk. She does not look like a money launderer. That, investigators would later note, was precisely the point. The arrest of Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan that February morning would become one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of federal cryptocurrency enforcement. The criminal complaint filed that day by the United States Department of Justice alleged that the couple had been sitting on one of the largest hoards of stolen digital currency in the world, the proceeds of a massive hack that had taken place nearly 6 years earlier and which had long been assumed by the crypto industry to be a cold case. To understand what happened, you have to go back to the evening of August 2nd, 2016. Bitfinex was, at that time, one of the world's premier cryptocurrency exchanges. Headquartered in Hong Kong, it processed billions of dollars in Bitcoin transactions annually. On the night of August 2nd, someone exploited a vulnerability in Bitfinex's multi-signature security system, a system built around software provided by a third-party custodian called BitGo. The attacker, later identified in court documents as Ilya Lichtenstein, fraudulently authorized a sequence of more than 2,000 individual transactions. Each transaction was small enough to avoid triggering large value alerts. Each moved Bitcoin from Bitfinex customer wallets into a single wallet under the hacker's control. By the time Bitfinex's security team detected the intrusion and suspended trading, approximately 119,754 Bitcoin had been siphoned out. At August 2016 prices, that figure represented roughly $72 million, a substantial theft by any measure. But what no one could have known that night was that Bitcoin's value was only beginning its long climb. The coins stolen from Bitfinex on that single evening would, by the time federal agents moved in February 2022, be worth approximately $4.5 billion. By the time sentences were handed down in 2023 and 2024, the government's total recovery would be described in DOJ filings as representing roughly $10 billion in stolen funds, a figure reflecting the extraordinary price appreciation of the asset sitting frozen in the hackers' wallets for years while investigators worked the case. Bitfinex responded to the breach in a way that shocked its own users. The exchange socialized the loss across all account holders, imposing a universal haircut of approximately 36% on every customer's balance, regardless of whether their specific funds had been stolen. In exchange, customers received BFX tokens, IOUs that Bitfinex promised to eventually redeem at full value. Most customers eventually made whole, but the episode cemented Bitfinex's breach as one of the most consequential hacks in cryptocurrency history. For the stolen coins themselves, the trail went immediately cold. The destination wallet sat almost entirely dormant. Occasionally, small amounts would move, test transactions. Investigators later concluded as the thief probed pathways for getting the money out without triggering detection. But for nearly 5 years, the bulk of the 119,754 Bitcoin sat in one place, accumulating value with every passing week. The FBI's cyber division had been watching the wallet since the breach. What investigators needed was movement, a thread they could pull. In 2020, that thread began to appear. The laundering scheme that Lichtenstein and Morgan constructed was, according to court documents filed by the DOJ, both technically sophisticated and operationally meticulous. They understood that moving large quantities of Bitcoin directly to any regulated exchange would trigger mandatory know-your-customer checks and automatic anti-money laundering flags. So they built a system of obfuscation layers designed to exhaust anyone trying to follow the money. The first layer was chain hopping, converting Bitcoin into other cryptocurrencies to break the blockchain trail. From Bitcoin, funds were moved into Monero, a privacy coin specifically designed to make transactions untraceable, then converted back again through a separate pathway. The technique is designed to create a cryptographic dead end for blockchain analysts. The public ledger shows funds entering the Monero network and disappearing, with no visible record of where they emerge. The second layer involved cryptocurrency mixing services, also called tumblers, which pool funds from multiple sources, shuffle them, and output equivalent amounts to different addresses. The result is a transaction record that looks like random financial noise to anyone trying to reconstruct the original source. The third layer utilized darknet markets. By sending funds to accounts on dark web trading platforms and then executing purchases or withdrawals, Lichtenstein and Morgan inserted their Bitcoin into the ordinary daily flow of illegal darknet commerce, where blockchain analysis tools lose resolution rapidly in the volume of activity. They also employed a fourth method that agents found almost quaint in its analog simplicity. They converted portions of the stolen Bitcoin into gold coins purchased through peer-to-peer trading platforms, moving value off the digital ledger entirely and into physical form. Those coins could then be sold for cash, completing a loop that converted blockchain-native stolen funds into untraceable physical currency. To move money through regulated exchanges without triggering identity verification, the pair used fake identities. Court documents describe multiple fraudulent accounts created with fictitious names and fabricated identification documents, allowing Lichtenstein and Morgan to interact with cryptocurrency platforms as though they were ordinary, unrelated retail customers. The accounts were opened carefully, staggered over time to avoid patterns. The scheme was built to last, and for years it worked. What broke it open was not a single dramatic discovery, but the accumulation of blockchain forensics over time, combined with what investigators described as a critical operational security failure on Lichtenstein's part. The FBI's investigation relied heavily on blockchain analysis firms that specialize in tracing cryptocurrency flows across the public ledger. Bitcoin transactions are pseudonymous. Each is linked to an address, not a name, but the ledger itself is permanent and entirely public. Every transaction ever executed on the Bitcoin blockchain is visible, forever, to anyone who knows how to read it. What blockchain analysts do is follow those address-to-address connections, building graphs of fund flows, identifying when addresses cluster together under common ownership, and eventually linking blockchain activity to real-world identity events, an exchange withdrawal, a purchase, an IP address leak, a moment when pseudonymous crypto touched the identified banking system. Over the course of their investigation, FBI agents and their blockchain forensics partners were able to map the flow of stolen Bitfinex funds through the various obfuscation layers. The chain hopping left traces at the conversion points. The mixing services, while designed to obscure origin, still had to output funds somewhere, and the recipient addresses could be tracked forward. Darknet-market withdrawals left patterns, and the fictitious exchange accounts, despite their false names, had been accessed from devices and IP addresses that left their own trails. According to the criminal complaint, investigators were eventually able to link specific blockchain wallets to cloud storage accounts controlled by Lichtenstein. In those cloud storage accounts, they found something remarkable: a file containing private keys, the cryptographic passwords that give the holder absolute control over a Bitcoin wallet. Those keys corresponded directly to wallets holding the largest portion of the stolen Bitfinex funds. The discovery of that file transformed the investigation. It gave agents not just evidence of the scheme, but the practical means to seize the underlying assets. On the morning of February 7, 2022, as agents moved on the Brooklyn apartment, a parallel team executed the technical seizure. By the end of that day, federal law enforcement had taken control of approximately 94,636 Bitcoin. At that point, the single largest cryptocurrency seizure in the history of the Department of Justice. The DOJ's announcement described the seizure value at approximately $3.6 billion at that day's prices, noting that the government was continuing efforts to recover the remainder of the stolen funds. Back in the apartment, agents worked methodically through the hardware. The MacBook yielded encrypted files. The hardware wallets were bagged and tagged. The handwritten cipher notes were photographed in place before being collected. According to court records, Lichtenstein had been careful, but not careful enough. The cloud storage containing the private keys had been backed up across services he controlled, and investigators had obtained the legal authorizations to access those services before the arrests were made. Heather Morgan's role in the scheme, as described in DOJ filings, was that of active co-conspirator and money laundering partner. The criminal complaint detailed her alleged participation in moving converted funds through a succession of accounts and into products and services that could then be liquidated for clean cash. She was not merely a passive beneficiary of her husband's hacking operation. She had helped construct and operate the laundering infrastructure. The couple's public personas had offered them a kind of cover by their sheer implausibility. Ilya Lichtenstein was a recognizable figure in Silicon Valley and New York tech circles, a co-founder of a startup that had received funding, a LinkedIn profile full of professional endorsements, a man who gave talks and attended conferences. Heather Morgan wrote columns for Forbes about sales strategy and appeared at business events. Her Razzlekhan music project was strange enough to draw attention online, but that attention read as eccentricity, not criminality. The eccentric rapper who also writes for Forbes is not the profile that typically triggers a federal investigation. But federal investigators are not in the business of dismissing cases based on profile. The blockchain doesn't care about LinkedIn. What mattered to the FBI's cyber division was the money, specifically where it came from, where it went, and who was holding the keys. In their initial court appearances, both Lichtenstein and Morgan were held without bail, given the magnitude of the alleged offenses and the significant flight risk presented by access to multi-billion-dollar cryptocurrency holdings. They entered not guilty pleas. Their attorneys indicated plans to contest the charges. That posture would not hold long. In August 2023, both Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan pleaded guilty in federal court in Washington, D.C., to conspiracy to commit money laundering. The plea was a significant moment, a public acknowledgement that the scheme described in the criminal complaint was not a fabrication of federal overreach, but an accurate account of what had happened. Lichtenstein, in his plea allocution, acknowledged that he was the individual who had accessed Bitfinex's systems in August 2016 and executed the 2,000+ unauthorized transactions that drained approximately 119,754 Bitcoin from the exchange. He admitted to creating the layered laundering infrastructure, the chain hopping, the mixing services, the darknet market accounts, the fictitious exchange identities, the gold purchases, over the years that followed. Morgan acknowledged her role in executing the laundering transactions and moving converted funds into the financial system. Federal prosecutors noted in filings related to the guilty pleas that both defendants had cooperated with the government's ongoing investigation, a factor that the sentencing court would weigh alongside the magnitude of the offense. Sentencing took place in November 2024. U.S. District Court Judge Colleen Collar-Catelli imposed 5 years in federal prison on Ilya Lichtenstein. Heather Morgan received a sentence of 18 months. The disparity reflected the central roles each had played. Lichtenstein as the originating hacker and primary architect of the laundering operation, Morgan as a secondary participant in the laundering scheme itself. The sentences drew immediate commentary from cryptocurrency legal observers, many of whom noted that 5 years for what prosecutors had described as the theft of tens of thousands of Bitcoin, funds worth billions of dollars at current values, was substantially lower than might have been expected given the scale of the offense. Federal sentencing guidelines in financial crimes cases typically scale with the dollar value of the fraud, which in this case reached extraordinary heights. The government's sentencing memoranda acknowledged the cooperation factor as significant in the ultimate disposition. What the government had also succeeded in doing, and what the DOJ made clear in its public statements, was recovering an extraordinary portion of the stolen funds. Of the approximately 119,754 Bitcoin originally stolen, the seizure of 94,636 Bitcoin represented the recovery of roughly 79% of the stolen coins. Given the dramatic appreciation in Bitcoin's value between 2016 and the time of recovery, that figure translated to what DOJ described as approximately $10 billion in recovered funds, a sum that made the Bitfinex hack recovery the largest financial seizure in the history of the Department of Justice by a substantial margin. Bitfinex itself moved to participate in the recovery process. The exchange had, in the years since the 2016 breach, redeemed its BFX tokens at full value, making its customers whole. The question of how recovered funds would be distributed between the exchange, its customers, and the government became a separate legal proceeding. The case had implications that extended well beyond the recovery of stolen Bitcoin. For cryptocurrency exchanges, the Bitfinex breach and its aftermath illustrated two lessons simultaneously: that sophisticated infrastructure could be successfully attacked in ways that took years to fully understand, and that the pseudonymous nature of blockchain ledgers did not confer the permanent anonymity that many had assumed. The fact that the FBI was able to track the movement of stolen funds through privacy coins, mixing services, and darknet markets, and ultimately recover the assets, sent a message to anyone operating under the assumption that cryptocurrency made financial crime untraceable. For federal prosecutors and blockchain forensic specialists, the case demonstrated how dramatically the tools for following money on public ledgers had matured. The techniques used to map the Bitfinex fund flows in 2020 and 2021 simply did not exist with the same precision when the hack occurred in 2016. The passage of time, ordinarily an enemy of investigation, had in this case allowed the forensics capability to catch up to the criminals' operational security assumptions. For the broader federal law enforcement community, the case established new records and new templates. The FBI's Cyber Division, working with the DOJ's Money Laundering and Asset Recovery Section, had coordinated a technical seizure of digital assets at a scale not previously attempted. The mechanisms for executing that seizure, taking control of cryptographic private keys through legal process and technical means, were now proven and documented. Special Agent Jonathan Levin, who had been one of the case agents since the early blockchain analysis work, later described the investigation in public interviews as a long game. The patient accumulation of blockchain data, cross-referenced over months and years against IP logs, cloud storage contents, exchange account records, and financial institution data, eventually built a picture specific enough to support both the arrest and the seizure. The moment the private key file was discovered in Lichtenstein's cloud storage, Levin said, investigators understood that the case was going to close. There is a quality to this story that is almost farcical in its surface details. The rapper wife, the music videos, the Forbes bylines existing simultaneously with a $500 million crypto theft. But the underlying mechanics are a serious case study in how financial crime conducted entirely in the digital realm eventually intersects with the physical world in ways that investigators can exploit. Every fake identity required a document. Every exchange account required an IP address at login. Every conversion of Bitcoin to physical gold required a seller. Every purchase made with laundered funds required a shipping address, a card number, a traceable event. Lichtenstein understood blockchain forensics well enough to construct an elaborate obfuscation architecture. What he underestimated, according to investigators, was the persistence of federal resources applied over 6 years, and the rate at which blockchain analytics capabilities were improving. The tools available to the FBI in 2021 could see things through the layers that the tools of 2016 could not. The file with the private keys was the end of the line. Everything else, the chain hopping, the mixers, the darknet accounts, the gold coins, the fraudulent exchange identities, had slowed investigators down. It had not stopped them. On November 14, 2024, Ilya Lichtenstein was remanded to federal custody to begin serving his 5-year sentence. Heather Morgan, sentenced to 18 months, was also remanded. The approximately 94,636 Bitcoin seized by federal agents on the morning of February 7, 2022, remains in the custody of the United States government, the subject of ongoing proceedings regarding its final disposition, its value as of late 2024 representing a sum that once seemed unimaginable for a stolen asset that had sat in a digital wallet for the better part of 6 years. The Bitfinex hack of 2016 began as a story about a vulnerability in a cryptographic custody system. It ended as a story about something simpler and older: the patient work of federal investigators who understood that no crime, however digital, floats entirely free of the physical world. Every key leaves a lock, every lock leaves a door, and every door, eventually, opens.